Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Soulful Sips. I'm Alyssa,
I'm Julie.
And I'm MJ.
and we back, baby.
Yeah, we back.
Talking about MBTIs again. Surprise, surprise.
It's a topic worth multiple episodes, I want to say. It's very fascinating to me.
I mean, people have a whole podcast around MBTIs. My teachers, my MBTI teachers, thank you. Thank you.
You've dropped that on the previous episode, your MBTI teachers, and I'm itching to ask you a question, but I feel like it's gonna throw us off on a tangent so wide
Let's do
that
it. What's the
I'm holding
question?
it in. I mean, you have an MBTI
Yeah, who are
teacher?
they, first
Let's
off?
start there.
No, it's like...
Are you gatekeeping these teachers from us?
Yeah.
That's why you're such an expert.
So I was avidly listening to Personality Hacker.
Okay.
They are, and I mean this in the most respectable way. Like, they're the absolute bomb ass knowledgers of personality, MBTI. Antonina Dodge. Oh my god. Yeah, I love how enthusiastic she is about all the personality types. She goes through all of the letters, all the permutations. She talks about like compatibilities, and she shares her own. But she also just doesn't just talk about her own MBTI, which is such a great perspective to have, and the depth that she goes into to help you understand about your type or even just yourself is great. I went from listening to everything that has to do with my MBTI and then everything else because I was able to then not only grow appreciation for other types of personalities, but then be able to learn about myself through others' personalities as well. And I just can't recommend her enough. Yeah, her podcast, or at least some of her content, is probably years old now, but obviously very timeless. And I highly recommend binge listening to her. But Antonina, I think, partners with someone else too. But yeah, I highly recommend.
I feel like I am very in tune with my own MBTI and can just like listen and read hours and hours and hours worth of content of my own. But I need to get better at like figuring out other people's MBTIs as well and getting a better understanding of theirs.
I'm of the perspective where if you know somebody's MBTI and kind of use it to maneuver that particular relationship versus having these like dedicated conversations about, oh, that explains, or maybe this is what I can do differently, in my interactions with you. I feel like if that's kind of the perception of a person that I have going into, interactions to begin with, it kind of creates a little bit of a confirmation bias where I think, this is what they would like or this is what they wouldn't like. And I'm just conscious of that. But I do agree that I think I'm hyper aware of my own MBTI and not as much about others. Because I like when I was taking notes in anticipation of this episode, I was just breaking down like ENFJ and then just thinking of like workplace examples that attest to that particular character, that attest to that particular letter being in play. So that's just like a suggestion that I had. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Why don't you lead the charge, MJ?
Okay. So in terms of my MBTI impacting how I approach work, starting with E, I would say I love going into the office. I love being in a role where I meet clients. But one thing that I found interesting is that just because I like meeting new people doesn't mean that I don't get nervous about those interactions or have doubts about those interactions that ultimately make me slightly less prone to enjoying those interactions, if that makes sense. So although I enjoy getting energy from other people, I still get very nervous about the whole interaction that I think it's still an energy taker.
Interesting.
That is interesting. So you look forward to the interaction, but when you're in it, your nerves or doubt kicks in.
Yeah,
So
or
are you
actually the
enjoying that?
other maybe the
Uh-huh.
other way where I'm not looking forward to the interaction, but once it happens, I have a hell of a time, like a good time.
Mm. So there's some level of like anticipatory dread there, but then once it
Yeah.
actually happens, you're okay to get into the groove of
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
How about for you guys?
So for me, for a little bit of context, most recently I've been a product manager in tech, and PMs typically we have to interact with everybody all the time, all day. It's a very visible role and a role that requires a lot of meeting facilitations, and it's basically like 60 to 70% in meetings, whether you're
Mm.
remote or in the office. So for me, I have to be a lot more aware of my energy levels when I am working, and I have to put forth a little bit more effort to pull out kind of the extroversion and being able to facilitate and communicate, and just I'm very aware that I'm on during work hours, and then I have to
Mhm.
turn off to conserve my energy. So I definitely feel the battery drain at the end of the day. I definitely, if I have to do a day in the office, I really have to prepare myself for it the night before and not plan anything else afterwards. Like I'm very much aware of my energy conserve and how much I have. But I do think that that allows me to be a little bit more introspective after the conversations happen. And that has helped me a little bit more, I think, in the workplace, especially when it comes to a position where you do have to reconcile so many different opinions. That is an area where the I kind of leans as a strength for me, but the energy levels are one thing that I have to kind of actively work toward.
Interesting. And would you say the people that you work with are introverted or on the extroverted side?
Depends on the team. So
Oh,
when I'm
okay.
working with my engineering team, a lot of them are going to be introverted. So when I know that I'm going into meetings with them, I know I have to be even more on to make sure that there's energy in the room.
Mm.
Versus if I'm working with kind of sales or marketing, a lot of the time their energy is going to be pretty pretty on par. So yeah, it really depends on who I'm working with.
Interesting.
Very interesting. As a more split in the middle type person, I I'm a little frazzled with this one, trying to grapple myself with all of this. But I'll say that I don't dread going into the office. There are times that I look forward, but I would never open my statement by saying I love going into the office. It's kind of a very middle, straight down the middle way of explaining it. But if I were to take you through my day, I would have, so I was in also in tech, quite a quite the schedule of back to back to back to back to back meetings, and I I would be quite on point and on the contribution or on the lead for the majority, if not all of those meetings. And I'd be enjoying the interaction and feeling quite energized from it. But at the end of that day, I'm socially drained. And while I would continue going on, even if it wasn't a meeting, if somebody were to come up to my desk, if I'm at work and we'd start talking about whatever that business topic is, I would entertain that for an hour or even over for however long we need to hammer that out. But if there were people around me talking about something not related to work, I would just never participate in it. Like it's doesn't interest me, it doesn't energize me, it drains me. I see no point in it. Please stop bothering me. Please don't do it near my desk. Let me be. Please don't do this open concept office space. Like I need my little cubicle
Oh,
at this point. If everyone's
Oh,
just going to be talking to each other. So that's
mm.
how I see myself. Yeah. Oh,
It's
and then
interesting
also,
because
yeah, go ahead.
no, finish your thought.
Oh, yeah. It also, I can't stand a day that I have no meeting. That to me takes me off my whole schedule. I need a couple of meetings and like people to talk out loud to and talk out loud with for me to then get a good kick of energy for my next sprint of working.
Interesting.
So is that purely from an energy perspective or from a productivity perspective as well?
Both. Like I need that conversational stimulation for me to have the energy to be productive and focused.
Oh, wow, wow, wow,
And the
wow. Okay.
productivity isn't always centered around what I just talked about. It could be completely different. But I need that kick. Otherwise, I'm just kind of stagnant.
Mhm.
I would say I have different buckets of energy, just visually speaking, for professional conversations or professional human interactions and personal human interactions. Like for me, where I thought I kind of like stood out from what you guys were talking about was after a long day of like back to back meetings, I would love to go hang out with friends and then just be able to talk about something else and then just socialize and then, get my energy from hanging out with them and doing like fun things, if you will. Um, but in terms of the last point that you made, Julie, about needing meetings to get the energy to kickstart your productivity, I'm actually the opposite, where I concentrate so much better when I'm not engaged in conversations. And I love days where I have sparse meetings because it's like less distractions for me. So I think I just wanted to draw like the difference that I thought also being half and half on the extroverted and introverted side. I thought that was an interesting observation.
That's so interesting. Okay, so I'll chime in my perspective from being on a heavy I side, on the introverted side. So if I were to have a really busy day and I was like, but I still want to see this friend, I would like make them come to me. Like I would see them with the caveat that I'm not doing an activity and I can like stay in the safety of my own home. But when it comes to the whole meeting and productivity thing, I lean more on I need those days of where I'm like blocking off my calendar. Like, unless you are literally on fire, please do not reach out to me for any meetings because I need my heads down work to like get things done. But that's a little bit of like, it's kind of a reality thing, right? Like, if you're in meetings all the time, there's just no time to sit down and collect all of those thoughts. So that's more of a, yeah, that might be more of a me thing than a MBTI thing. This next one is actually something that I'm very interested in because Julie, we've had this conversation a little while back, and I never really thought that deeply into how being an N versus an S can affect how you thrive in the workplace. And you called out a couple points that I thought were very interesting coming from someone that is an S. And yeah, so I'm very curious to hear both of your guys's perspectives on how your N and S drive you in your work life.
I'll just share my point because I've shared it in our previous episode very briefly. To summarize, my experience with the N versus S, I found my S to channel through quite strong in terms of being able to solidify takeaways, create a level of a structure slash action orientedness to the discussions or to the executions. And so I find that that's been a very good, I've found that that was a benefit for me. I'll stop there. And then, MJ, if you could share your thoughts as well.
Yeah, the difference between N and S is the most complicated for me because I find myself identifying with both very deeply. So I was trying to look up my split, and I think I'm relatively split fairly down the 50-50. I would say being able to think, you know, big picture wise, or being able to almost hypothesize the art of the possible or a potential scenario has been helpful. Where on my job, I sometimes have to create things or kind of invent things, in the mind of what could be done about a situation where there is no precedent. But I would also say, like, I appreciate when people are detail oriented. So I tend to try to be detail oriented, which I think is a facet of being an S.
I see detail orientation as something that's different for me because I see that more of a T versus A trait, actually. I say
Okay.
that because I am somebody that's an S, but very not detail oriented, like quite big picture. Don't tell me all the details. Just tell me the one thing that's going on. Um, but I'm just more focused on like the day to day, the next step, rather than can we take a moment to think of all the possibilities that could go with the situation, and then be in that space for a little bit. To me, that's not something that I'm able to contribute to or create an environment for as a very very S type personality, like probably 90 something percent. Yeah. I find it really, really difficult for me to just explore.
Mm.
Yeah. What do you think, Alyssa? Sorry, MG, did you want to respond to that? I know I just kind of like
No, no,
shared a
no.
different perspective.
So
Yeah.
for like my benefit, the difference between S and N is S's like to look at kind of facts and what's on the table right in front of you, what's laid out, and kind of go by that. Whereas on the N side, you are more comfortable with abstract concepts, right? Is that kind of the fair delineation between the two?
100%. Yeah, that was so
Yeah.
well defined.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say um for me, I I kind of come at it from both angles as well, where the end side of me really comes out when I'm on projects where I'm leading and facilitating like ideation and brainstorming sessions, when we have to kind of figure out what is going to be the best direction to go in to make sure that we are pleasing stakeholders as well as customers, as well as staying within kind of our technical realm of feasibility. So the N in me is kind of able to allow me to creatively problem solve in that sense. But when it comes to execution and taking more of a pragmatic approach to what our learnings are, I have had to learn to be more of an S in that sense. So that does not come natural to me. That is something that I have to work on very, very consistently. And when it comes to trying to tell a story to stakeholders in a very linear and strategic way, that's where I struggle a lot and lean a lot on my mentors to kind of help me uh, articulate what my thoughts and my findings are.
I would say being an N is a strength when I'm designing PowerPoint slides. And, I deal a lot with PowerPoint at work, and just being able to imagine what a slide could look like in my head has been a blessing for me. So I know that's a strength on the N side. Um, and then I can go into detail about how S is costing me or how not being an S is costing me, but I'll stop there because I'm working on being an A versus a T.
I envy your N in being able to think of possibilities for slides. That's when I will type in for a PowerPoint slide template and I'll look at all the Google search results and then derive, analyze what I like from everything and then put it together, then create my slide rather than just like shift things in my head and then scratch that, think of a different idea, or I don't know how it happens in your mind, but I wish I could do that.
Well, I mean, I also Google templates. So maybe I need to walk back what I said. I love copy and pasting. But for efficiency
Yeah.
reasons, you know?
Right. Yeah. Maybe we should move on to T versus F.
Sounds good.
Yeah. How do you guys think T versus F plays out?
So I consider myself a very empathetic person at work, which means I am very down to share and take up other people's work when they're not able to, for example. And that comes at the expense of what my personality overview pointed out, that I'm not very good at drawing boundaries as much. And I tend to kind of give up a lot of things before I realize I didn't gain a lot from it. And that sounds very transactional, but sometimes you just have to balance, what you give and what you get in a workplace. So I think that's a question that I constantly face. How about for you guys?
I tend to very much lead with empathy in the workplace as well. I don't think that's very much a surprise, as all of us are Fs here. But I will say that what I've observed over the years is that has tended to give me a pretty good reputation amongst my peers. However, it has not always given me the highest level of visibility amongst my leaders. So I'm often overlooked by leadership, I feel like, because I am not the strongest or loudest voice in the room. But on a more personal setting, the way that I lead with empathy with my teammates and try to make everyone feel heard, I think that's something that is often recognized more by my peers and my leadership.
That is such an interesting point because I feel like I struggled a lot, especially during the beginning stages of my career, where you would often face the question of, do I prioritize my peers or do I prioritize my visibility to leadership? I feel like that's a question that comes up very often, especially in the beginning stages of everybody's career. And I've found personally that in the long run, prioritizing your peers' respect pays off dividends greater than being visible to leadership in the long run. In the short term, like the rewards of being visible to leadership are just so in your face that it's so tempting, but that's the conclusion that I've come to.
I agree. And it is something that you kind of have to experience to get to that conclusion. But at the end of the day, it's like, do I really need those accolades, or do I want to build these relationships? Because it's a small world at the end of the day, and you never know when someone can come back and be a great connection for you. So yeah, that's tended to be what continues to motivate me as I try to navigate through it. But not saying I have it all figured out. It's not easy.
Yeah, and maybe just to add another point, I feel like now that I'm in a position where I can kind of look at my juniors and see what type of approach they take, maybe this is just me coming from a point of like me being an F, but I definitely notice when my like the people that I work with put their peers first versus trying to take momentary like glories for themselves. So I think it kind of adds like maybe we also underestimate how much value leadership puts on our ability to, make relationships and respect others that are our peers.
Yeah, and if I were to just build and reinforce that, I think it's quite obvious when someone just takes the glory for their own, and it's not a trait that many people admire or like, and it doesn't attract many people either, although we've seen people succeed with that type of mindset. With that in mind, I actually think that that might not be an F trait, perhaps, because I know many teens that have their values on what respect is and what lines to cross and what lines not to cross, and it's more their approach to thinking that might be a bigger role to play. And I see this coming from, and I've shared this with Alyssa before, but people have shared with me that they see me as a T if when they get to know me from a work environment, and they're quite surprised when I say I'm an F. They're like, you or have emotions. Like a lot of people get really surprised when they're like, I didn't like where if we were to have like a one-on-one call and it just comes to some them sharing their personal struggles or something, and I share with them mine back, they get so surprised. They're like, you were going through things, like you feel things, like what is like I often rely on you because I think that you're just so like quite unfeeling. I'm kind of I'm totally exaggerating this, but they've shared with me that they rely on me on an emotional standpoint because they perceive me to be somebody that just doesn't.
As
Sorry,
somebody who
guys.
can kind of like logically sort through like the complex emotions they're feeling, is that kind of what they were thinking?
So in meetings, there's very little emotional opinion that goes through when I'm sharing things.
Mm-hmm.
I cut through to the chase, and I don't buffer things in to be like, well, I think this and maybe that. I say, this is this and this is that. And I think we should move on this way as a result. And so there's very little level of doubt or carefulness that's crafted with my responses. And I think people take that as, okay, she is just not feeling things, or I don't know what it really is, but anyway, I don't know where I'm going with. Sorry, guys.
No. I think what you're trying to say is that like your coworkers who confide in you through their emotional moments believe in your ability to just bring perspectives that are not just emotionally clouded, and that's how they feel, so they're looking for like a perspective from an objective, from their point of view, person who will not be as swayed by emotions just based on their experiences of you taking emotion out of your communication in workplaces. That's my interpretation of why they're confiding in you.
That was so insightful.
I also wonder if, although you are a very empathetic person, I wonder if the S side of you, because it allows you to articulate yourself in such, and I've said this to you many, many times, because it allows you to articulate yourself in such a linear and clear manner, I think that is where your coworkers might confuse you for a T, but that's actually your S probably masking your F.
I agree.
Thanks, guys. I think that is great. That is like exactly what I wanted to say. Copy and paste. Let's do it. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think this kind of goes to, it's important to call out that just because someone is empathetic or leans more F on the scale does not mean that they're overly emotional. And then on the other end of the spectrum, just because someone is a T does not mean that they're all unfeeling. It's just not what motivates them initially when they're communicating, what they're
Totally.
processing. Yeah.
That's a good clarification.
Yeah, I really think that, and Alyssa and MJ, thank you so much for helping me focus where to think. When I think through a situation at work or any situation, I do this whole yes, no checklist to say, is this relevant? Yes, no. Is this like, what is my decision criteria? So then I start to do a whole matrix in my mind of, yes, this is like hitting my decision criteria number 1, 2, and 3. And as a result, this is the final insight. Anything that has to do with a frustration, an annoyance, anything that tends to charge people with emotions with what's going on at work is a completely irrelevant piece of information that is only that's not allowing us to move the conversation forward. I think that's why I come off as a T. Yeah, I think that's. I'm just gonna. Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, I think that's like to Alyssa's point, like S, where you're focused on like the facts on hand and the things that are immediately relevant versus what's more abstract that can seem like emotions can seem a little bit more abstract. So I think there's an S and N that bleeds into F and T. You know, I don't think these are like clear cut boundaries and say like, you know, this example is just related to F or T or S or N. I think it's a little bit of like you being an S and an F that plays into your situation like that.
Yeah, I agree. I actually don't think my F goes into often at the forefront. It really is something that happens on the back end where if I'm having a meeting, I will ask people that I think might have an opinion who to give them a voice and to bring in that balance and harmony, which is a very F type of trait. And when I do make decisions, I make sure that I get many people's decision before putting something forward. And I do look at the consensus or the majority of people's opinions rather than just simply what I believe to be the right logic. So in those senses, like the F does come out from the background.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
Thanks,
There it
guys.
is.
Thank
There it
you.
is.
Thank you for helping me through that. That was painful. Thank you.
No, MBTI is a good self-reflection tool. It helps you
For
just
sure.
understand your strengths and like your strengths, period. Like, you know, like what your strengths are in your workplace.
I love it. Cool. Let's move on to the last one, which is J versus P.
J versus P. This is a little bit more of a obvious one, is it not?
In terms of which one's more superior, I agree.
Done and dusted. Doesn't even need to be said.
Okay, moving on.
I mean, in a career, I guess, yeah, in a career space, I having structure, being organized, being able to plan ahead, I think is obviously a strength. Would I love to be able to be spontaneous and try to think on the spot and problem solve on the spot? Yes, but I think it also depends on your job. Like a lot of jobs are a lot more conducive, I think, to J personality types. You know, you got to be organized with your shit, you know.
Mm-hmm. I will say like being spontaneous and being able to like respond quickly to changes or, you know, just random things thrown at you may be a strength of P. Just trying to save the P's, you know,
Yeah,
namesake.
for sure.
Um but and I wonder if like if I think about like Elon Musk, and I'm not saying he's an effective leader, I have a lot to say about that, but if I think of Elon Musk, I wonder if he's more of a P where he's more impulsive and kind of goes with the whimsical wishes that he has versus like planning out every step and kind of thinking through the repercussions of his decisions. And I think that can be conducive in certain environments where like new ideas and risk taking are rewarded. But I think in a lot of corporate settings where planning and thinking through steps and just being mindful of consequences, I think J is a strength in
Yeah,
that regard.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the risk and how much that risk will affect you if there's a negative impact. But I have seen where it has benefited to, you know, execute first, fix later. Although that is not
Mm,
typically the route that I would like to take, being a very risk averse person.
mm.
But yeah, I can see both sides. I still would rather lean on my J in order to continue to succeed in the workplace.
I agree.
Hmm. As somebody that's in the middle of the J and the P spectrum, although I definitely would say if I were to choose one, it's J. Uh, and to both of your guys' point, it does depend on the situation and the culture of the organization and the work that you do. The company that I worked at, every single day, every single hour, the decision changes. And you hear it from different sources all the time. And that affects what you've just been working on or what you've been working on this whole week or this whole day so far. that you've dropped everything for, you've put like all of your effort in because fire drill, and then now it's going to pivot again, so you have to redo everything. And so in that sense, P was absolutely critical to be able to be flexible with it and not get stressed from it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to survive. And I say that consciously because many people were not okay with that and had decided to leave as a result. What I found with my team members, I had more P team members than and some J team members, and the J team members got very stressed out quite easily with all of the changes that were made because there was not a moment to organize anything and to actually go through the checklist and be able to check everything off or anything off on that list that you created for yourself that day, versus the P's would be working in their sprints. And if you tell them, oh, this has changed, they're a lot more chill with being like, okay, yeah, no problem. Like, let me change this. And I would check in with them and I'd be like, is that okay? And they're like, yeah, like, it's okay. I was just working on it and it just changed. I'm like, you are so chill. Like, it's quite interesting to see that type of mindset in those intense work environments. And I'd say that in my experience, the P was quite important for us to have. Yeah.
If I were to turn that question or that comment on its head and say, if your leaders were J, would would your team have been happier?
No,
Okay.
because the stress of the J, and sorry, I'm just kind of like in that work environment intensity right now, but I'm right now imagining the stress that the J has just felt with the structure that they had planned upturned and frazzled because they have to now shift their order all around or pivot and be able to react to that really quickly. And I think that's quite hard for somebody to lead with that in that environment.
Can I push back a little bit on
Yeah,
that perspective? I think
sure.
to a degree, I see it. So I see what you're saying. I agree because having experienced those very quick turnover environments and high stress environments, I can see where P is a lot more conducive because they can handle that change with less stress. So the stress factor I agree with. One thing that I think the J can bring to the table in that sense of quickly adapting is a lot of the times J personalities will have planned for multiple scenarios to make sure that they can stress test whether or not, if something goes wrong, what is going to be plan B, C, D, and E should something come up. So I think in that sense, I still lean more J as being more dependent in types of scenarios like that. Not saying that, but to your point, the stress level would be a lot higher than a P reacting to it.
Yeah, I think like reactions will vary between J and P in terms of how like stressed we get from that situation or how we just feel about it. But I think in terms of planning doesn't mean that you have to be certain about every scenario. I think you can plan to be uncertain, but also like this is there are different people under the J spectrum, right? So I think Alyssa, you and I plan for uncertainties, but there are also people who are completely lost when there are like no plans and there's no like visibility into what's
Yeah, for
next.
sure.
So yeah.
And to your both of your guys' point, perhaps a very J type of personality does plan for many possible permutations. To me, that sounds more like an NJ type thing. For me as an SJ, I'm just like, this is
Could
going to
be.
be my general direction. Maybe if you guys went from like steps A to F, I would just go A, B, and then C would be all other possibilities are possible. And that's just like my ABC. And then I know that C is going to happen. Like there's an 80% chance that C is going to happen. So there's no point of planning for C, D, E, F. And that's where I just kind of go forward with. But I say if in best case scenario, go with A and B. That's really all I do. And perhaps that's just because I'm more of a middle J and P type of personality as well.
It's also very situational though, right?
Yeah. I think the culture had to do with a lot of
Mhm.
me deciding not to plan for anything because I know that things are going to change.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that one bit.
I think this is like a good place to wrap, because when we first started, we were like, there are 16 personalities in the world. But I think this goes to show that a combination that you have of the 4 characteristics, plus your culture, plus the environment that you face, plus the people that you're surrounded by, like leads to who you are and like what personality that you end up having, versus like these 4 letters actually defining you to the T and then saying, this is who you are, take it or leave it, so
Exactly.
that was my takeaway.
Yeah, I agree. What ended up being the most polarizing one for us to talk about was the one that I thought was going to be the easiest, which was the J and the P. So that's enough evidence there that there's a lot of complexities.
I'll take ownership on that one.
As you should.
Stir the waters a little bit.
Yeah.
Discourse. It's good.
Healthy discourse.
Yeah. It was good. I loved going through all the different MBTIs with you guys in the workplace setting. And I think it gave a lot of insight as to how we could reflect back on our work styles and the work styles around us to better appreciate how we could all contribute to a great working environment.
Agreed. Can't wait to continue this conversation and get even deeper into other topics like relationships, friendships, family, the whole shebang.
Yes. So exciting.
Well, with that, we shall sign off. 오늘도 수고했어.
I made it this time.
Yay!
Is there gonna be an outro music? Like,
I'll edit it in.
Oh, okay. I love outro musics.